Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour, brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connection. I'm Marcie Keithley, Board President and host for the evening, along with Beth Story in the Zoom room helping out. I believe Jennifer will be joining us if she hasn't already shortly. So we appreciate all of you coming out tonight. Beautiful weather we're having here in Southern Indiana. I don't know what's going on in the rest of the country. I've been kind of busy here. Candace, where are you at right now?
I'm actually in Nevada right now.
You're in Nevada. Okay.
Yeah.
So Los Angeles. I know we've got attendees from across the United States and outside of the United States. I know Peter, you're joining us from Australia this evening. Condolences go out to Peter on the loss of his mother. We lift you up, Peter, this evening, and we're glad that you're here with us tonight. Okay, before we get started, let's go ahead and do some little housekeeping items, please, Beth. Again, a reminder that this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook. If you're joining us for the very first time, we do have a private Facebook group on called Adoption Happy Hour, and that's where the replays will be shared. So if you haven't joined us there already, please make sure you do. Make sure you stay on mute for this evening, raise your virtual hand, or you're free to leave comments. And let Candace know what part of the country or outside the country that you're watching from. At 8 o'clock, we'll stop the recording and we'll open it up to Q&A from all the attendees. We want to also make a note that if you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We have anything else, Beth?
Up to you. Do you want to do it now or at the end?
Well, we can go ahead and do it right now.
Okay.
Just go through those quickly. Again, tickets are on sale now for Untangling Our Roots Summit in Louisville, Kentucky, March 30th through April 1st. A reminder, the first 100 tickets are $279, and then the prices will go up. We're filling up and we're selling a lot of tickets, and it's happening fast. So this is going to be a very, very unique get together in March, and we hope that many of you will be able to join us. Again, David's group, Adoptee Paths to Recovery, bi-monthly on Tuesday evenings at 8:30 p.m.
His next one is November 1st.
November 1st. Okay. Thanks, Beth. And then Amber Jimerson, First Families, Birth Parents Journeying Together, the second Thursday of each month at 6 p.m. And then we have Dr. Joyce, Putting Yourself Together After Reunion. And I believe she did just send in the date on that one.
The 22nd, I think she's going to
22nd of November.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, want to mark your calendars for that one. And then last night we had, this is our newest group that is spearheaded by Danielle Gaudette, Self-Love Essentials for the Adoption Constellation. And she had a room full last night. So she is monthly on the last Thursday at 6 p.m. I know because of the holiday, we're probably going to be doing that one on Wednesday, but we'll be sending out more notices about that. Okay, we good? Okay, thanks, Beth. I appreciate it. Okay, Candace, it's me and you tonight. Yeah. So let's just dig right in. Welcome to Happy Hour. We're so excited to have you here this evening and learn more about you and your story.
Well, it's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. It's nerve-wracking to talk in front of people anyway. And then, when you're talking about something so personal, and for, I think, well, I'll speak for myself, something that really is very traumatic. It's pretty hard, but groups like this are the most welcoming, and they tend to open their hearts and understand the difficulties that surround all of these issues. So I'm originally from Minnesota and now live in Alaska. Have been up in Alaska for the last 26 years. I'm coming to you live from Nevada though, but partly ended up in Alaska to get away from the memories and life from previous, get away from my mom, who I had a very contentious relationship with. But I've got my background is such that after I placed my son for adoption, and I use placed because that terminology was what was kind of given to me when I was going through the process. I was 20 years old and found myself unexpectedly pregnant, had a boyfriend, and just figured that we would be parenting together. That was going to be our story. In my family, the vast majority of girls and women became pregnant 16, 17, 18 years old. It was no big deal. And you just had babies and you became parents. So that was how I kind of went into it, thinking that everything would just fall into place. And basically I got kind of tricked into going to a adoption agency. I thought it was just a counseling. The way that it was presented to me was as parenting counseling. And then having grown up in a tough situation, it was a pretty easy, I was pretty easy to pick off. I mean, I look back at it now and feel like I was preyed upon to a certain extent, that I was easy pickings because I had come from such a tough background. But regardless, the counseling that they gave me was what they called decision-making counseling, where the bulk of it was just to essentially show me how ill-equipped, how poor, that the fact that I came from a bad background, that my family was not a good support system for me. And I, pretty much, I agreed with them. I didn't think that I came from good background. I didn't think I was good enough stock. So I was pretty easy to convince that somebody else would make a better parent than I would. The hindsight being 2020, I can see all the various coercive ways I was treated and the things they said, the terminologies they used. And I drank the Kool-Aid to a great extent, that adoption is beautiful trope, here I was, this young, now single, woman from the bad side of town. And here were all these other beautiful people. There were couples, and they were going to be able to give my child everything that I wouldn't be able to give them. So I fell right into it. And part of it, I think, I look at it now too, and they spent a lot of the time in the counseling tearing me down, and making me see all the things that were wrong with me and wrong with my life. Never gave me any information on how I could become better or get better or learn. But they tore me down. And then once I was really down at my lowest, they, said, well, and here's this beautiful option of adoption. And if you do this, it means you're brave and you're smart. And I think looking at it, it's like, I was so low. I felt so horrible about myself. I was going to latch on to anything that would help me feel better. And if somebody was going to say that I was brave and selfless, and I was going to take that, because I needed somebody to say that I was better than I was believing myself to be. It's a very sad situation. I feel very manipulated in everything that happened. And a big part of it too is I chose it. It was my choice. So I spent the next 20 years blaming myself. As soon as I walked out of there, and as soon as the papers were signed, I knew that I had done the wrong thing. I knew that that he would hate me, or I believed he would hate me, that I would spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. And so I couldn't live that way. So I pretty much blocked it out. I completely disassociated from all of it. The only time I ever really allowed myself to think about him was when I would get updates. I would get a letter in the mail once a year. That was the agreement that that was our open adoption. A letter would come through the agency and I would get that, and I would lock myself in a room and sit with the update and the pictures and cry. And then I would put it all back together in its little spot, in its little box, little shoe box, Marcie, and put it away and block it out. And, in the first few years, I would take it out more often. I would take it out, every couple of weeks. I would lay out what I had. I had his first pacifier. I had his bracelet from the hospital that had the name I gave him on it. And I had his, the blue baby blanket that I had stolen from the hospital. And I had those things, and I would lay them all out in this perfect little display. And I would just sit in the middle of that and grieve. And then I would put it all away again. And, did that for years until the updates stopped. When they no longer, let's say it was 8 years old is when the update stopped. And there was no recourse. There was nothing I could do because, I had signed away my rights. When I went to the adoption agency to ask them to do something about it, they're like, well, you don't have any rights. They don't have to send you anything. And so that was just another block, just turned it off, did my best to avoid it, ignore it, pretend it wasn't there. That was about the same time I got together with my husband, who I've known since I was quite young, he, at one point, I think it was when Michael was turning 6, he said, I told him ahead of time, I gave him a 2-week notice. I said, I'm going to be a basket case around his birthday. It's just what happens. And he turned to me and he said, well, we, what should we do to celebrate? And I'm like, we don't celebrate. I don't celebrate his birthday. It's a horrible experience. And he's like, no, you're still a mother. He's still here. We should celebrate. And that kind of cracked the shell for me, and at least began to get me to try to think at least somewhat positively about him. But Tom has always just been somebody that wherever I was at, he would just sit with me with it. He would be, if I was angry, if I was sad, if I needed to be left alone, if I needed to go for a walk, whatever it was, he just never had any demands and never expected me to feel one way or another, which had really helped me through the years. We ended up, Michael reached out to me his adoptive dad reached out to me, sent a letter. I received it 2 days before his 18th birthday. And within that letter was a very large stack of photographs and a very long 5-page letter. And I'm going to close this door. A very long 5-page letter. And I've learned some things in that letter that I don't really necessarily want to give it away on here. I guess if it comes up, I can talk about it, but essentially, Michael wanted to meet me or wanted to know who I was. And in that letter, there was a phone number. So I remember I did the exact same thing when I got the letter, the envelope with all the pictures and everything. I ran home and I locked myself in the room and I laid everything out together, and I read everything, and then I called Tom, and he came home from work, and he read the letter, and at the very bottom of the letter was the phone number. And he turned to me and says, "You ready to call?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, I'm calling right now." And so got on the phone and talked to his adopted dad first, who maintained the gatekeeper position throughout all of this, which I respect in the sense that he wants to protect Michael. That's his job. That was his really his number one job, was to protect Michael. And he didn't know how I would respond. So I respect that he did that. And he talked, and there was some chit chat, and I'm just like, I'm sitting there, I just want to talk to Michael, just want to talk to Michael, just want to talk to Michael. And finally, I said, "So is he there?" And David went to get him. And I remember hearing his voice for the first time. And I was like, he's a baby. How can he have a man's voice? That all those years, I didn't know where they went. And suddenly there was this little man boy voice on the phone. And it was just basically my heart exploded. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. And then we talked for like 2 minutes, and then it all stalled out because I didn't know what to say and he didn't know what to say. And we're just like, both of us were like, we don't know what to say, but this is amazing. And how are we going to do this? And he recommended that we do email. He was like, talking on the phone is too hard for me. I'd like to do email. And I'm like, absolutely. We'll take it, whatever speed you want. You will have complete control over out of this. And that's where we left it. And I got off the phone with them, and Tom and I were just freaking out with each other. And I told him that we're going to email, and we logged on right away. Bling, there was already an email. Now mind you, it was one sentence, and it was like, "So I guess I don't know how to start, but so tell me about yourself." It was kind of like that, but it was amazing. Unfortunately, things then completely slowed down. And I've learned since then that, that initial response tends to have the adoptees often pull back, and he did. And Tom had to really rein me in, because at that point, now all I wanted to do is I wanted to fly down to Minnesota, and I wanted to go to his door, and I wanted to put him in my arms, and I never wanted to let go again. And I couldn't do that. And I had people around me, Tom in particular, but also his adopted dad, David. And as I started doing research online, reading about adoptee experiences, reading about reunion, everybody said, you need to let the adoptee make all the moves. You need to let them have control, because they're the only ones in the entire situation that never had a choice in it. And it was so hard. It was so hard. But I had support. And so we, let him take control, and I would get a text every once in a while. I would get an email once in a while, but it was, once every 3 or 4 months. And it took 2 years until he asked if we could meet. And that's, now, so you guys know, I wrote a book, The Reunion. That's one of the best things, I think, because it was just the most amazing experience to go. I mean, I was terrified, but, and I was sure that he was going to reject me and say, that I can't believe you gave me away and you don't even deserve any of this. I mean, that's what went through my head. Not that he ever said anything like that, but that was what was going on inside my heart, is that I deserved to be rejected. He deserved to be angry with me, and he deserved to shut me out. But that is not what happened. And when we showed up, Tom and I went together to meet them in Minnesota, and we got to their house, and it was Michael with his adoptive dad standing outside in the doorway. And I walked up, and here was this big boy man version of me who was just unbelievably adorable and handsome, and he took me in a great big bear hug, and that day we spent, I think we spent almost 6 hours together nonstop, and it's still the most amazing day of my life. Unfortunately, it's the only day that we got to meet because he passed away. He passed away in his sleep. No known cause. But we never had a chance to meet again. And grieving a second loss is what opened up me to realize and recognize that the grief of relinquishment is in many ways harder. And I don't mean to compare. I don't really want it to be comparable. I don't want to compare to people, or I don't want to compare the losses in certain ways, but people just don't understand and this is true, not true for everybody. I guess just for me, don't understand that the grief of losing him to the adoption, of relinquishing my parental rights, was infinitely more difficult than losing him when he died. Now, when he died, it opened up all of the grief from the relinquishment. So now I had to deal with both because I really hadn't dealt with the first one. And it's the compounding issues. For me, it was for every grief that I contained with the fact that he had died, there was a corresponding grief from the adoption, from the relinquishment, and it just, it was this cycle, and every single day, every single hour, trying to figure out how to get through that was horrendous. And so Mary, so at least you get sympathy for death and we don't for adoption loss. So that's a huge one. That's a huge one. When I would tell somebody that I relinquished a child to adoption, the most common thing, oh, you're so brave, or oh, that's beautiful, or all of these rainbows and unicorns, and the cognitive dissonance that needs to happen when that happens is just insane. But when I tell people that my son died, it's the automatic outpouring of sympathy. And part of writing this memoir and writing this book, and what I want to use it for, is I want to use it as a tool, so that to show people how we need to be looking at this as the grief and the loss, both the grief and loss for the adoptee, the grief and loss for the first families. It's completely ignored and negated. That I know people that have said to me, whether they're first parents or adoptees, is like, yes, I have a good life, I have these things, but it doesn't take away the initial grief and loss that takes place as a result of relinquishment. And we need to change that. And I want to use my story to do that, because I can say to people, and in particular, hopefully adoption professionals, adoptive parents, hopefully and all those people, it's like, you need to recognize that this is the case. And because my son died, they can show sympathy, and I can use that. I mean, I'm being shameless. I'm totally going to use the fact that they're showing me sympathy for his death, but not for his relinquishment. And I know some people will disagree with that as a method, but I mean, people won't listen otherwise. People are so caught up in the rainbows and unicorns of adoption that they just don't even want to see the fact that it begins with such incredible loss. All right, I feel like I just blah, 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 blah all over.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. Yeah, so let's back up for just a few minutes. So first of all, I want to acknowledge the loss and tell you how sorry we all are. And I know how difficult this must be for you to come in this safe space and share that with us. So our hearts go out to you, and thank you for being here this evening. The year was 1989, Candace, right? When this whole thing began.
Yeah.
You know, you talked about the subtle marketing, that subtle coercion. I mean, it's still going on today, obviously, but the year was 1989 and it was still happening then, just like it is happening today. And for you to reach the decision of being placed, I think we still have to back up even further that and talk about family dynamics.
Yeah. Oh, Marcie, you're cutting out. Or I am. Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, how much did you get? I'm sorry, my internet keeps going in and out.
Yeah. You got to start over with
Okay.
that.
We were talking about prior to 1989. Even then, talking about the family dynamics in your home and inherited trauma and how your mindset of how that affected you in 1989, and share just a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge component for me. You know, I grew up in the kind of the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. No running water, no electricity, which is unusual for someone my age. So we were poor. We were really poor, and in an abusive home. So I actually, I didn't find out until I was 13, but my dad, or the person I thought was my dad, was not my dad. My mother had divorced my birth father when I was an infant, with good reason. She had come home from the hospital without me because I was sick. I had to stay in the hospital and found my dad in bed with another woman. So very good reason to leave him. And, but her next husband, who she married right away, forced him to relinquish and then adopted me and then abused me. So my very first memories are of being sexually abused by this man. So when I learned at 13 that I had a different father, that was a real father, I was ecstatic. It was so great. And then I just tucked that away. I didn't think about it anymore. So I just, that was my stepdad, so it's a weird thing, but it was quite the shock. It was a very good shock. And then I didn't think about it again for a long time. But my mother and then my siblings, I have 4 siblings, we left the situation when the abuse came out and moved away and didn't have anything. We were poor, we were dirt poor. And, I remember going to town with all of our laundry to go to the laundromat. And mom would give us, each of us kids, $2 in food stamps to go buy something that was just a little over $1 so we could get the change to help do laundry. And, so that was just a part of how we had to survive. And all of those things played into my decision to relinquish, because I didn't want to repeat the poverty. I didn't want to repeat the abuse. I didn't, I mean, in my mind, if I am single and have a child, if I go to look for someone else to be a partner, to find a mate, my number one priority is going to be, first of all, for that child, which is what it should be. But I was terrified that I would bring home someone who would abuse my child, because it had happened to me. So all of those things played a huge role in my decision. And I still regret it, but I can see how I got there. Yeah. You're on mute, Marcie.
Later, I get ahead of myself. Later on in your story, now, we're still talking about family dynamics, but we're going to flip it here a little bit. You developed a relationship with the adoptive father.
Yes.
That is crucial to your healing process. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yes. So David, the adoptive father, he was really the reason I selected them as a couple. When I was going through the, pick your parent thing, they give you your 4 files. But his was the only letter that was handwritten. And he addressed every single thing that I thought was important in his letter. I mean, everything. Like, I actually, about 5 years ago, I contacted somebody at the agency because I was like, did you guys give him my list? Because it was that close, right? Anyway, so David was really the reason I chose them. When I met him the first time, which was before the adoption was finalized, but after they had already taken him into their home, they came to meet me, him and his wife, Jane, and their other son, John. So John was 4 years old, but they didn't bring Michael. But John was there. So John was 4, and I was talking with David and Jane, and David was crying and displaying emotion. I mean, like no fear, no shame, nothing about emotion, which I'd never seen a man do in my whole life. Never seen a display of emotion like that. And he was completely comfortable with it, right? And then John, who was on the floor coloring, but kind of sits up all of a sudden and goes, "Oh, my dad cries all the time. They're tears of happiness." And I was just like, so these things all played into me kind of putting David on a pedestal. And I just really believed that he would end up being a good role model for Michael. And it gave me a sense that, okay, it's going to be okay, right? When Michael died, David called us and told us, and I said, I have to come, I have to be there. And he said, well, of course you have to be here. And when I got there, as we flew in, which was an amazing thing, we actually got to Minnesota in less than 12 hours, which never happens from where we live in Alaska. So we were meant to be there. But when we were driving to his house, and I was experiencing the exact same feelings I felt when we drove to meet Michael for the first time, which was, they're going to turn me away. I don't deserve to be here. I'm not his mother. I'm not good enough. I abandoned him, all of these things, right? But we show up, and David stood in the door, the exact same place he had stood with Michael 3 years earlier, and engulfed me in a bear hug and said, this is where you need to be. And from that moment on, every single person that we met, and I hadn't met anybody else in the family other than David with Michael that day that we got together, every single person we met over the next 2 days, he introduced me as Michael's mom. He didn't say birth mom. He didn't say, anything else. He said, this is Michael's mom. And they made room for us right in the front row, and we stood right next to the whole family at the gravesite, and just completely enveloped us into their family. And about 4 months after the funeral, as I was, I think, coming out of shock, and still trying to figure out how the hell do I navigate this, because nobody knows. Nobody knows. I mean, okay, I lost my son twice, and I tried to find people online that could help me. I went to compassionate friends, and they were helpful, and they were, it's like, oh, this is a good place for you. And then, I'd say I lost my son, Michael, and they're like, well, what was he like? I didn't know. I didn't even know what he was like. So how do I even respond to that question? So it always came back to, I couldn't find a place. Anyway, so about 4 months after the funeral, I finally realized that there was someone else that knew exactly how I feel. And that was David. Because David had both lost Jane, his wife, and Michael. So he had double loss as well in his immediate family. And I reached out to him, and I sent an email, and I was just like, I'm lost. I don't even know what to do with myself. And he wrote right back, like within an hour, he wrote back and he said, me too. I don't know what to do. I'm completely lost. I'm completely at wit's end. And we started ping-ponging emails back and forth. And we did that for months. until we came down to Minnesota, and he invited us to their home, and we spent the whole weekend there with them. And he took me down into Michael's room, and we sat there and we looked at all, picked up all the things that he had, and everything he'd pick up, and he'd be like, oh, Michael, really love this. You should have it. And he would fill my arms full of things. And until I couldn't carry anymore, until Tom couldn't carry anymore, and said, these are all things that you should have. And that experience, since then, we have maintained a very close relationship. And he's been to Alaska. He brought the whole family to Alaska, and we hung out up there. And we go, whenever we're in Minnesota, we spend a weekend with them, or sometimes a whole week. They've been down here where we have a home in, and they've been here and spent time here. And, for me, they hold everything that remains of Michael. And I think for them, they see me and they see him, because he looks just like me.
So both of you actually gave something to the other in this healing process.
Yeah, absolutely. And we continue to. So, he knows that I'm, when I talked to him about writing this book, I'm like, I'm going to write the story. And he's like, yes, you should absolutely write the story. And I'm like, and there's going to be some hard ass shit in there. And he's like, yeah, well, because there's hard ass shit in this. Right. And every time, so like I don't know if any of you saw, but I had an essay that came out in Newsweek a couple of months ago. And so as I was doing that, they asked for a photograph. And so I wrote David, I said, David, so can I use this photograph of me and Michael and give it to Newsweek? And he's like, absolutely, you absolutely need to do that. I have another piece coming out in Huffington Post soon. And it's like, they asked for his graduation picture. So, and I always check with him, but he's pretty much said, he's yours, he's mine, he's ours. It's all together. Yeah.
Well, speaking of hard shit, let's go back to that, because there's a question here about in your story that there's several times you have to face up to the truth about yourself.
Oh God.
Okay. Yeah. And I can relate to this because I ran into the same thing. So share with us why it's important. That was important that you share that in the book and how that relates to your healing process.
Yeah, so there's quite a few things about myself that I still don't like. And there's a lot of truths that I wish weren't true, but I can't wish them away. And I don't quite know how to answer the question, Marcie. It's just that, being able to put that stuff in the book was important, because I think people need to know that none of us are perfect, ever. None of us are. But my imperfections didn't mean that I couldn't have been a mother. That it didn't mean that. I took a lot out on my mother, and it took me a long time to rectify that. And I had to, admit that there were a lot of things that I did that were my fault in that too. I think without the truths, without putting those pieces into the memoir, it doesn't work. People will be like, no, it just doesn't. It just can't be true. And I think that showing the vulnerability hopefully makes people see that I'm trying to be as honest and authentic as I can here, and call people out. I'm going to call people out, but I'm calling myself out at the same time.
Yeah, I think that showing that vulnerability, gives your readers insight into who you were, or who what you experienced, and through this journey and where it brings you today. Because all of us can go back and go, boy, what did I do when I was 18 years old? If I could change that. We could all say that. But I think in writing a book, when you're talking about yourself, that's something that you have to process and revisit the old Candace right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's tough because you have to sit there for a little while
Yeah.
and move
Yeah.
yourself through that. And that's an emotional, things come up. Things come up when you're doing that, but it is crucial. I think it's a crucial piece of your story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really did try to, as I was writing it, I was trying very hard to put myself back into those places. I had journals, I had writing, I had, emails and all of these things. And I tried to use them to kind of physically place myself back in those places so that I could actually write it out the way that I was experiencing it in the moment. Because for me, it didn't work for me to look at it from where I am right now. 54-year-old Candace can't tell you what it was like to be 20-year-old Candace.
Exactly.
Yeah, 20-year-old Candace has to do it, so yeah.
Yeah, because you have to go back. You have to go back.
You have to.
It's tough.
And doing that has helped me immensely.
Yes.
To accept who I am, to forgive that young woman, to mother the little girl who didn't have a mother, all of those things. Michael has given me more than anybody else other than maybe Tom. And I'm very grateful for that.
And then as far as the memoir goes, you didn't have any formal education.
No.
So you're writing from your heart, and I'm sure you were, can I do this? Can I not do this? Should I do this? The emotion that's around, putting your story into book form.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I am I'm a Renaissance woman. I am definitely a Renaissance woman. And if I want to do something, damn it, I'm going to do it. And, I wanted to learn how to weld. I learned how to weld. I can build you a wagon if you want, I won't, just because I don't have what would be considered a formal education doesn't mean that I can't do what I want to do. And I have always been that person. And I have a friend of mine who she laughs at me every time I talk to her. And so we don't live close by anymore, but one day she picked me up when we were driving up into Canada, and I had brought I was sewing something and whatever. And she's like, what do you not do? And I'm like, I'm doing everything that I'm going to do. I'm going to do it all. And writing the book, I love to write. I've always loved to write, but I never did it formally for, really other, obviously school here and there, those things, but it's like, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And still doesn't mean that I don't get nervous and think that I'm sometimes crazy for what I'm doing, but I'm doing it. I'm out there.
And for a minute too, let's update the attendees on how Tom played
Okay.
and continues to play a huge part of your journey, your healing journey.
So Tom, my husband, we've known each other since like high school. And we actually think we had swimming lessons together in first grade, but we don't have proof. But we think we did. But we've known each other since high school. We didn't date back then. He had a girlfriend. I was a wild child. And I remember we were friends, and I would take him to the theater and music, and we'd hang out and do stuff. And I remember once being at his mom and dad's house down in the basement and playing his dad's guitar, and his parents were like, "Oh God, no. It's this girl. No, right?" But he had a girlfriend, so we never got together. And then later, when, well, I was 26 or 20, 26, he kind of showed up out of the blue. It's a great story. It's a great love story. That's in the book too. The love story, the sad story and the love story weave together to help keep you alive, because if it were just one, it would be too hard, in my opinion. So the love story with Tom helps. But anyway, we ended up getting together, and he is the only person other than members of my family who felt my tummy when I was pregnant with Michael. And I was 8 months pregnant. He had come home from college, and I saw him at the mall, and he he was like, whoa, you're pregnant, because I was very pregnant. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, I want to come over and catch up. So he came over to my house and we sat there, and I had basically just surrendered and given into relinquishing, right? So I had just gone through picking the parents, all of that. So I was 8 months pregnant. And I sat with him and I told him I kind of told him the story, you know, that breaking up with my boyfriend and him and his family and all the crap that they did, and you know, deciding that I was going to relinquish. And he just sat, and I just cried and cried, and he just sat with me, and he didn't demand anything. He didn't try to make me stop crying. He just sat with me. And then when I quit crying, he literally went, can I touch? But he didn't touch me. He didn't break a boundary. He just, can I touch? And then I broke down all over again. But he sat with me for, I think, over an hour and just let me cry. And then he left. I didn't see him again for like 6 years. But yeah, now we're together, and he's been one of the most supportive people through all of this. You know, with Reunion, he was the one that helped me maintain my sanity to a great extent, because again, all I wanted to do was grab on and never let go. And he's like, you need to give him his space. And he was my voice of reason through all of that. And then after he passed, Tom, he had this weird mental connection that, like, when we were flying down to Minnesota for the funeral, I'm in shock, right? And I'm like, I would just be sitting there, and all of a sudden I would just, the tears would come, and I'd be bawling because I'd be thinking about the fact that we'll never get to watch Doctor Who together. We've been talking about Doctor Who. We're going to watch Doctor Who together. And I'm just bawling, right? And I haven't said anything. And Tom goes, it's really sad that we're not going to be able to watch Doctor Who together. You know, like he read my mind. And this happened over and over and over again for the 2 weeks after his death. So he just, I don't know, he's been that person. And then a few of you heard, he came with me to the Cub retreat this just a couple of weeks ago. And he came with primarily because I've just recently had back surgery, and I can't lift or twist or bend or anything like that. So he came with to be my Sherpa, right? But he wasn't planning to attend any of the events. And then he came to the icebreaker or whatever Thursday night and met a few people, and a few people were like, well, you should attend, you know. But we had talked about him not going because he was worried that if he were with me, I would turn to him and kind of rely on him and not reach out to meet other people, that I wouldn't, you know, can make connections. He was worried. So the next morning I'm like, you know, I think you should go. If you want to go, I really want you to go. So he did. And he participated in every single event over the course of the weekend. And, you know, he shared in the support group and shared some hard stuff that he's dealt with as a result of all of this. And he's willing to be there with me, take the journey alongside me. And I wouldn't be where I am without him, really. He's been monumental in everything that I've been able to do in writing the book. And he, like, when I wrote the book, he didn't read any of it. He refused to read it while I was writing it. He didn't read the book until I sent the manuscript to my publisher. And then he read it two times back to back. But he didn't want his voice in there. He didn't want to influence anything. He didn't want to change the story, which he could have very likely have done.
It's so important to have a journey mate, right?
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot, about the importance of having one. Okay, we're winding down, getting close to the 8 o'clock hour. So we're going to start closing down the recorded portion of tonight. We want to open it up to the attendees to have their opportunity to ask their questions of you, Candace. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this time.